Okay, so yesterday's recording, and I had a feeling, even though I had selected the mic out of the UI, it was picking up one of the other ones here, which is rather frustrating because there's no obvious way in this silly application to tell me which mic it's actually using. And so, even though I'd selected from the main operating system to use this mic, it was picking up another one. So that's probably something that's going to drive me to a different application. But thank you, Microsoft. Once again, I used to work at Microsoft, so I feel kind of like a family member a little bit in exile when it comes to stuff like this. It's like I know you can do better, boys. You know, it's the silly stuff like this that just kills me. But anyway, this morning I'm going to talk about something a little bit lighter today, but it is kind of heartfelt. Strangely enough, is the concept of isekai in Japanese animation and manga, because it's kind of near and dear to my heart. Isekai means another world, um, and it relates to usually the main character comes from a normal world of some sort, usually Earth, usually the modern day, but sometimes others, and ends up transporting to another world, often a fantasy world of some sort. And a lot of times in the Japanese animation stuff, it's a video game world or a game with world with mechanics like a video game. But kind of the concept is that the world is a lot easier to understand in some way, um, and that the character has power of some sort in this new world. Mainly, they have their memories usually of their old world and can bring those to bear in some fashion or another. And oftentimes, though not always, they also pick up powers of some sort that give them a leg up even in that world. That they're somehow superior besides their own knowledge. But that depends on the story, and there are different types of these. The concept, of course, is nothing new. You can go before stuff with copyright that's expired. In fact, Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, uh, Princess of Mars is another one with John Carter, whose powers are beyond reason when he goes to Mars. And of course, The Wizard of Oz is another famous one where the main character has come from Earth and is in this new fantastical world. And of course, in Wizard of Oz, she receives the blessing of one of the four witches. And those are some strange stories. I read those to my daughter. But in any case, but like I said, the Japanese versions usually have a very fair constraint to fall into this, and it's been something of a scourge. It turns out. In the Japanese animation community, people who enjoy this stuff, because there's so many of these things, right? This genre has been very popular for the past 10 years or so, and it frustrates some people that you either like this stuff or you hate it. It seems to be there's no real in between, but it's very popular. Who's it popular with? People like me, 30 to 50 year old, you know, you know, gamer kind of introvert men that enjoy this kind of power fantasy. But there's a show. There's one of them that really actually hit pretty hard to me. Was one called Uncle from Another World, Isekai Oji-san. Um, the main character, the premise is the main character was knocked into a coma in 1999 as a teenager. He was 17, so he's actually just 2 or 3 years younger than me, and he was really into video games when he was a teenager. Uh, and when he wakes up, he is speaking a completely different language. Nothing that exists on Earth. And he's visited by his nephew, who's like, okay, he's detailing what's going to happen to him now that he's woken up, and it's been 18 years. It takes place in 2017, and he says, and the old man is, oh, Japanese. I haven't heard this language in for so long, And he starts going on about this other world that he's been in for all this time, and of course, the nephew's like, okay, you're crazy, until the old man starts shooting fireballs or whatever. He starts doing magic, and the nephew's like, "Okay, you're coming to live with me." And the premise kind of is he has this ability, um, to use his magic to create like a video screen, and he can replay his adventures in that other world. And so it toggles between their little adventures in modern day, which a lot of it has to do with his anachronistic understanding of electronics, his love for video games that are they're just hard to find, and his perception of the world from the turn of the millennium. Um, and the first thing he says when he wakes up is, "Who won the console wars? It's Sega," because he's such a Sega fan. Sega, of course, they lost that console war like in 1999. The Dreamcast was like their last major console before they knuckled under and started partnering with other people. Um, and Anyway, it's the main character identify with him quite a lot. Even though he's kind of comical, he because of his deep understanding and his absolute passion for this medium when he was a teenager, it kind of bleeds over into his whole worldview, because all he knows is the world up until then, 1999, and then everything in this fantasy world that he experienced, where he had a hard time because he goes, first thing he says is like, everyone was so beautiful in that other world. And the nephew's like, yeah, sure. And he says, I must have been so ugly. And indeed he was. They thought he was some sort of horrible monster every time he goes into these villages. It's a recurring comedic trope. But there's one scene late into the season where it's kind of revealed that he has been able to do that to the video screen thing and show that to his friends in that other world before he left it. And so he could replay to them what his life was like. And one of the characters, we don't it happened off screen, but one of the characters is talking to her friends, and she says, he showed me his other world. His childhood is another world. And he spent so much of his childhood in a dark room, staring at a dark box that glowed, and focused on this box for hours and hours at a time. It was it must have been such a lonely thing, right? And that kind of stabbed me in the heart there when you said that. Um, some of my earliest memories, one of my earliest memories actually, uh, was waking my mother up. I was probably 3 or 4 years old, because was when we lived in this particular house. So this is why I remember waking her up at crack of dawn, 6 in the morning or something, very very early, because Star Blazers was going to be on TV. Star Blazers was also known as Battleship Yamato. That was a space drama, kind of riding the wave of Star Wars and everything back in those days. And had this big ship that would fly through space. It was literally like a battleship that had been retrofitted from World War II, flying through the stars and fighting aliens and stuff. They were on this mission, and it had this giant cannon on the front, the wave motion gun. I watched it many years later, and it's actually a pretty good series. It's fairly dramatic for what it is. It's old animation and stuff. Um, but that medium, that art style is has really been there for me as a fundamental favorite medium to deliver these fantastic stories that I just really enjoy, the visuals and everything else. Robotech was another one where they're flying around in transformable airplanes and shooting down aliens and stuff like that. Another big spaceship that they're riding around in. And of course, in America, we had the thinly veiled marketing campaigns for toys that were He-Man and Transformers and such. And it's a very strange age. My age, that they call us exennials, between 1977 and 1982, 83 or so, that had a very unique Gen X slash millennial experience, because we grew up in a very analog world, index cards and rotary phones and phone books and all that other stuff. But as we came of age, we experienced these technological transformations, but there are also these kind of interesting milestones that we share. A lot of us do. Uh, you know, the Transformers movie, Optimus Prime and almost every other Transformer is slain in this movie, right? They're making room cynically for uh, the new wave of toys that they're going to introduce, but these were adults, stupid adults that didn't realize that these 8, 9, 10 year olds, whatever, that are watching this movie, they own these toys, and they are so instrumental to our imagination and our play, and they just, we were going to see them live on TV, and they all just get killed or turned into something else. And I remember the feeling after watching that movie. I bawled my eyes out, boy. And come home, and I have all these Transformers, and they're all dead. They're all dead. And I tried so hard to breathe life into them, but it felt like I was playing with corpses. You know, they really hurt us with that movie, and only people my age, the very specific small slim age, know what I'm talking about. Everyone else just kind of thinks that's, whatever. But this is a childhood dream, a broken promise, kind of like the loss of Santa Claus or something. And it actually chokes me up just a little bit to think about it. Still to this day, I'm almost 50 years old. It is what it is, but it's a little bit of a trauma delivered to us by the folks at Mattel. Thank you, boys. Um, but video games were also a big deal. Video games, I kind of, interestingly enough, think of people a little bit older than me as the Atari generation, because Atari was a console that the games, they were like, asteroids and centipede and stuff like that, and the point of those kind of games was just to rack up points and go as far as you could, and the games usually would speed up and speed up and speed up, or they'd add more enemies or whatever, until you'd have 3 lives and you would die. And that was part of the point, and who's got the high score, and at the arcade you put your 3-letter initials, oftentimes a naughty word, or something else. Um, and you were kind of running the leaderboard against other players, right? The Nintendo Entertainment System came out after the Atari had really died, uh, kind of an ignominious death because of the Atari. It's actually a really fascinating story, and maybe I'll actually do a video on that wave of video games in the 80s and 90s. But essentially, Atari shot themselves in the foot, because they didn't really secure their property rights, so to speak, and competitors could make stuff using their technology, and it led to a very strange situation where you couldn't get off the 2600 as a technology with the new consoles because of the backward compatibility requirements. Um, the Nintendo basically ditched it. They said no backwards compatibility. You can't play Atari games on here. New console, new game. What they did was they included Super Mario Brothers in that console, and that was a very popular game in the arcade. That was a quarter ear, boy. I love that game too, boy. It was really hard. It was really hard for the time. It was a platformer, and it had a mission. It had 64 worlds, I think, for 4 by 8, um, where the worlds were all different, and some of them had water and all that other stuff. And you would get to the end and beat the dragon, and then you'd get this little mushroom dude, and say, "Sorry, our princess is in another castle, and it would take you to another world." It was nothing like it really in the arcade, where you're kind of on this adventure. There were some other games, but anyway, so the Nintendo was that was a kind of a defining point in video game history, and I had one of the first ones. I was 8 years old, I think 8 or 9 when I first got the Nintendo, um, and the games that I remember for that console that I had, of course, was Legend of Zelda, which was, your little elf running around. Again, you got to save the princess, but it's a whole world, and you could save your progress. That was cool. Really immersed you into thinking you were here. Not literally, but it gave the world a lot more substance, because it felt like it was so big that you had to come back to it and remember where you were and pick up more stuff and everything. One of the earliest games I got was actually, they overmade it, nobody, because people weren't really interested in it, was a game called Dragon Warrior. It's called Dragon Quest in Japan, and it's one of the earliest. In fact, it is the earliest JRPG, Japanese RPG, which is a particular style of role playing game for the computer, um, where you have your hit point maximum and your hit point current hit points. You had, I don't know, remember that one. You had magic points, but a same thing, and you had spells, and this was a limited resource, and you would walk around the map and encounter random monsters and fight them, and you would get experience points and go up levels. You would find new equipment to make your guy stronger. You would learn new spells, and then when you were up high enough level, you would fight the big boss at the end of the game. I don't remember, I think he might have been called the Dragon Lord here, but because they didn't like the idea of the Demon Lord over there. Now the Demon Lord itself has become a trope. That game, I played that first game that established the trope of a demon lord who's sitting on his throne waiting bored for the hero to show up to fight him, because that's exactly how that game was. For whatever reason, the demon lord had no agency. He just was hanging out in his castle waiting for you to come kill him, whatever. It's good. Not really, but that's kind of how the mechanics of the game work. And then Final Fantasy uh, was another game like this, a little larger because you had four characters that you could select and choose the classes of and stuff. But the story, this game was, I was 11, I believe, maybe 12 when that game came out, and blew my mind because uh, very not very complex. But the premise was, you come in, the king says, "Go save my daughter who's been kidnapped by this dude." You go and you save her right away. But what happens is, through some magical process, this guy gets sent back in time and starts screwing up the timeline. He grabs this gem or whatever before he dies. Goes back in time, screws up the timeline. So when you return to the king, he's like, "The world's all messed up, and it has always been messed up. And you got to go fight these four elementals." And you go through and you fight all the four elementals, and you go back, fight the last guy, and then you end up yourself going back in time and fighting this dude who's turned into a crazy monster. And when you kill him, though, it the paradox of the fact that he has not created that scenario in the future uh, sends you back, and it tells you you've forgotten everything. Everything resets back to the start of the game, and the game starts over. And boy, did that blew my mind. That blew my mind. I was like, wow, I mean, it's kind of, you know, worn thin, these kinds of time travel stuff, these tropes. But back then, it was a new idea to me, man. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then Final Fantasy II here, which was the fourth version installation of that game in Japan, came out for the Super Nintendo, and I played the hell out of that game, boy. The graphics, again, nowadays you look back on it, you'll hear me talk about this stuff. Anybody who's younger goes back and looks at this game like, this game sucks, man. This doesn't good. It wasn't perfect for sure, but it was very expansive. And the music was incredible in that game, and the music to this day strikes my heart. Same with Final Fantasy III, which was a sixth installation in Japan. They got all the good stuff over there. I did actually play Final Fantasy V when I was uh, probably about 16 or so. I got a copy of it. They call it gray market because you're not supposed to buy that stuff in America, but you're also kind of like, we don't have it here. And I had to work with a Japanese to English translation book and played this text heavy game. Boy, I made a lot of mistakes, I'll tell you what. Um, but six was also just powerful game with just the sounds in particular were really would get to you. And there were a variety of other games like that really spoke to me as I played them over and over and over and over and over. Mastering them, you would beat the game, but then you would start over again and be like, I want to find more secrets. I want to make my characters stronger. I want to use different configurations and try different things. And they had a lot of Easter eggs. Some of them you made decisions and you just thought that was it, but then someone would tell you, no, no, if you wait at that thing, instead of just jump off the thing, the guy will come and you can save him. And so now you have this new character that you didn't realize you could play with because you hung out and waited for him instead of jumping off the ship that was about to explode or whatever. Um, because this was really the days before the internet as we know it. Um, there were guides that you could get. Nintendo Power was a magazine that would come in in the mail that would have some advice, basic advice on these games. But the role playing games in particular were very long and complex, and there were a lot of things you weren't going to find everything in those guidebooks, and you couldn't just go online. And they didn't hold your hand either. They just, here you go. You're in this level. Figure it out. And you try the different things out, and uh, uh, if you had to go back for something, you'd have to trudge back. There were no warp points or any of that stuff. A lot of times. So in some ways, there is a nostalgia, a romanticism to my particular playstyle, um, because uh, most modern games, they have uh, head-up displays that'll put a little marker on your map that'll tell you where you're supposed to go, and you'll have like a mission log that says what everything that's happened and all these other things, because memory is, uh, you know, when I is cheaper, so to speak, in these games. And people have come to lean on that stuff so much they kind of expect it. Tell me what I'm supposed to do next. You know, and you just, if you didn't remember, you better hope you kept good notes. That was another thing. I'd have these notebooks filled with notes about these games, especially one that I played. A silly, weird American game called Might and Magic. Boy, that was a big game. Graphics were terrible, but the story was so weird and fun. But anyway, um, so Japanese RPGs were my big thing. There were other games that I enjoyed for sure, and I had a friend of mine, Tom, who was exceptional at shooter games. He was just incredible to watch play, and he would just dominate you at games like Street Fighter and stuff. Um, but the role playing games, being able to just relax and spend your time and think about what you're doing, and the Nietzsche says, what is happiness but the feeling that power is growing and that resistance is overcome, right? So they call it the grind in these games. You grind mobs, moving objects, monsters, basically. You kill them and you get a little experience and a little bit of gold. And you fight another one and you do it over and over and over and over and over. And part of the game is just to grind and kill a bunch of monsters so you go up in experience. Because if you don't do that, like I did the first time I played Final Fantasy 2, you get to one of the bosses and they just wipe the floor with you, and you can't do anything about it because you just don't have the power to deal with him. He's expecting you to be a higher level, essentially, but based on the difficulty of the game. So the way you solve for that is you go back and you fight a bunch of monsters and train. Is effectively kind of the message that they have in this game, is you got to train to become better, to achieve certain goals. Very Japanese in concept. Um, the animation was uh, much more spotty over here. A lot of times, like Robotech, for example, because of syndication rules, they had to shoehorn the story of Macross, which is one of the better stories, um, into into two other series that were completely unrelated, and try to come up with a coherent story between the three of them so that they could meet the broadcasting requirements in America, where you have to have a certain number of episodes available for play for a cartoon that's on every day. You can't just repeat the same 26 episodes or whatever it was, um, because that's over very quickly, as you can imagine. They want a year long cartoon that's going to run at 6 in the morning or whatever it is on these time slots. And the translations were terrible. They would, remove certain scenes. Dragon Ball is a very famous one. That one did not. It took a while for that show to actually end up in America, because it had just, they weren't even really bad scenes, but there's a lot of juvenile sexual humor in a lot of Japanese animation. That underwear is a big joke for some reason. It's like, if a girl sees you see a girl's underwear, you get a nosebleed. It's a very common trope in those shows. But you can't have that in the United States. You can't have people drinking beer or any of that other stuff in these cartoons. We're very rigid on our restrictions, so that I had to edit these shows. The voice acting was often just truly awful, and the stories were often pretty weird. When you think about especially the earlier stuff that managed to hold on in America. Gigantor, Astro Boy. These shows were definitely a different breed than the kind of cartoons we were seeing. Bugs Bunny. I mean, I suppose they would think the same thing about Bugs Bunny. Man, this guy's, the Roadrunner and the Coyote. It's like this murderous Roadrunner just messing up this coyote over and over for slapstick humor or whatever. But anyway, um, liking this stuff when you were a kid in my day stigmatized you. All there is to it. I also enjoyed role playing games. When I got into middle school, I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, and this is probably another one that I'll do a series on, or a video on as well. Dungeons and Dragons. This was during the height of the Satanic Panic. You have to remember, and I was surrounded by evangelicals, and a lot of kids. Their parents were kind of far out there in terms of their religious beliefs, and there was a going story that I'm not kidding when I say that people believed, there were many people that believed that this was an instruction manual on how to talk to, how to summon demons and how to talk to the devil or whatever. Like, they really believed it. They really did. And if you really ever want to get an idea of how bad the Satanic Panic got, watch a pair of documentaries on HBO called The West Memphis Three, and what happened to those boys. Uh, because they had the book thrown at them just because they were a little weird and played Dungeons and Dragons, and listened to Marilyn Manson and stuff. Um, Now, I did not have such strange religious prescriptions in my household, but a lot of my friends did, and Dungeons and Dragons was a bad word. But what they did have was the Robotech role playing game, where you would jump into a transforming airplane, um, and fly around and play in that world. And it had nothing to do with magic whatsoever. So ostensibly, any of those games where if you didn't have magic, that was another one. Like Dungeons and Dragons was that's devilstry, and those guys didn't do themselves any favors because they put a big picture of a Balrog on the front, Baylor or whatever they call it for copyright purposes. This big demon on the cover. Parents would see that and absolutely freak out. But anything in magic in general, there were games that had magic, and those would be verboten. But anything with superheroes, that's okay, I guess. Superman, Gandalf, that kind of thing. Um, and Robotech was one where you could fly under the radar. One of these parents would catch wind. You're rolling dice and playing games. Yeah, it's a game about robots. We're pretending to be in robots. Oh, that's okay then. Um, but that was a huge stigma to be playing role playing games when I was in middle school and high school. Playing video games was a stigma. You play video games? Wow, you're just a nerd. Um, you like Japanese animation? That one was so obscure that a lot of kids didn't even know what to think about it. But they knew it was cartoons. Oh, you watch cartoons? What a child. That's kind of how they view that. Even though, in my Japanese class, I had been watching Dragon Ball Z, and now Dragon Ball Z, which is very, very popular now, very, very popular. But Dragon Ball Z back then, it was broadcasting live on TV in Japan at the time, and a couple of us had different ways of getting hookups of, you know, bad bootlegged VHS tapes that would have these broadcasts, and oh my god, we were like crack addicts. Like, oh, guess what I got, man? Like, oh, we'd all run over to somebody's house and watch this show we could barely understand, because they'd pound each other, into the dirt, shooting fireballs and stuff. Love that stuff, boy. Um, but uh, I was reading one of these comics, and I come up to my Japanese teacher, and I'm like, Sensei, what does kisama mean? And she's like, where did you hear this word? I'm like, yeah, that one and omae. And she's like, where are you hearing this stuff? And I'm like, from a comic book. I'm trying to frame it in a way that she would understand. She's like, this must be a very violent comic book. Yes. It is actually. I can't argue that. There's no way I can argue that, Sensei. There's no way. It's a very unpolite way of saying you. Uh, anyway, uh, I had a picture of Gohan. Is this very interesting little strange obscure timeline story in Dragon Ball Z, and so this character really spoke to me, and the idea was that his father had died in this alternate universe of this storyline, this time, I guess you would say, a timeline, and the main character's son had to carry on, and he got beaten up by these robots, and then he died. And so this guy came from this hellscape future where he'd been trained, and then he comes back in time to try to fix it. And he's way more powerful than anybody else. It turns out, as everybody trains and they get better, he's actually not all that good. But at the time they see him, he's just amazing, and he uses a sword and all this other stuff. And he doesn't have any chivalry when he fights. He just finishes it. Like we're not messing with this. This guy is a bad guy at the end. And I really liked that character. His name is Trunks, but that character, because the version of him in that time doesn't experience this hardship, is just kind of a little punk. He's not really cool at all. This timeline version of this character was cool, and so I really liked that character a lot. It was a very obscure thing. I had a picture of him on my binder, and people were like, "What is this? What is this?" I was maybe born in the wrong time then for this stuff, because I come out now. Little personal history. Uh, I am recently divorced, um, and I wouldn't say it was the factor. There were many, many factors, and some of them, quite a few of them, are self-inflicted. I won't deny any of that. But for me, one of the things that I struggled with was that my own spouse kind of viewed my own hobbies when we got together as being immature things that I would grow out of. She did not have much appreciation for any of this stuff that I liked. And as I became an adult, I still liked this stuff. I still played video games. I still role played with my friends. I still like Japanese animation. Now, the role playing stopped. You become a father, you don't have time to roll dice with your friends on the weekends. Just all there is. At least not in my world. Uh, and Japanese animation, even back in the day, was very hard to get. It was very hard to get. Anything that was, especially if it was like authentic, maybe dubbed over or whatever, would come on tapes for like $30 a piece for like 2 or 3 episodes. It was very, and they wouldn't finish the series and stuff, and it would take months for these series to be completed and stuff like that. And so the ability to watch this stuff was very limited, and it was hard to acquire. You'd have to go to a specialty video store, and they might have some stuff, and it's all expensive. So that was a hobby that already was tough to enjoy, because there just was so much limited selection. And that left video games, and of course, video games are time consuming, and this was always a bone of contention through my entire marriage, because I really liked playing various video games and sitting down and relaxing. I am an introvert. This is another aspect of my personality. I like to chill out, and I recharge my batteries when I'm not around anybody, especially after I've been at a hard day's work. And when you're living with an extrovert, extroverts don't understand. They just don't. That's all there is to it. No matter how many times you spell it out to them. I love you. If you don't want me to get spicy, as a friend of mine says, if you don't want me to be spicy, I need some time alone. This is not about you at all. I love you just fine, but I can't handle people right now. I need to chill out and do something that I enjoy until I am more personable. And but of course, for an extrovert, they see you alone and they think that you're not doing anything. I'm going to come hang out with you. you know, well, no, okay, you can watch, but please just sit there quietly. But they view it as rejection. You know, if you're not doing anything and you don't want to spend it with me and you'd rather be alone, then that's a value judgment. You don't like me. You know, is how introverts interpret that, or extroverts interpret that always. No matter what they tell you, no matter how many times, how you try to explain this to them, they can't help feeling this way with introverts. That's been my experience, and that's not just my ex. It's every extrovert I've known. They just don't get it. Um, no matter, even though intellectually they might, they can't help feeling that way. Um, Now, of course, now that that is all over, I have a lot more time on my hands, and I've been able to dig back into these things that I enjoy. And I've been, you know, especially when I first after the miserable trauma of the first 6 months or so of just living on my own. I was out of the job and didn't have a job for a good chunk of it too. This economy sucks, boy. Um, uh, just alone because I realized how isolated I had been throughout my marriage. I didn't have any friends really, no external hobbies, and I had to kind of rediscover who I was because all this energy, all the energy I had been focused on dealing with family stuff, and my hobbies had been very discouraged. Um, but once I started doing this stuff again, I was like a dog at a buffet table. Oh, Japanese animation, you have a whole subscription service now. I'd actually watched a little bit before the end of before things wound down, I would say, or blew up, however you want to look at it. Um, and one of the shows that I started watching that got my really got me back into it is a show called Overlord. And Overlord, the premise is it's in the main character comes from the future, the Earth's dismal future, where you play these video games that are completely immersive. And at the beginning of the story, this game that he's the guild master, and he's like a master of this really obscure, very difficult game, multiplayer, massive multiplayer online role playing game, which I never got into. I did before I got married. I played Ultima Online, um, until I realized what was the point of this, you know. Um, but I never played like World of Warcraft, and that's what this story is about, which I can get into a little bit too. Um, but he the game is end of service, and he decides he's going to spend the last moments and watch the server go out, but he stays, but he can't log out, and the world's a little different, and he is in this other world. His whole fortress has come to this other world that he is way overpowered for, and he steps out and is kind of playing the hero to begin with. um, but he realizes there's political implications and stuff. It's a very kind of Machiavellian sort of Game of Thrones sort of kind of feel to at least the way they're thinking. And he is almost like a god in this world, and he starts to realize that. And there's a lot of things in this show where he has hope for humanity, and you can watch that light dim bit by bit as the show goes on, you know, because he and his minions, he has no friends. His friends did not come with him, and he's on a search for his friends. Somebody else may have come with me, is kind of how he's thinking. But he is realizing that he's a god in this world, and people are awful. It's a very interesting story, but I really liked it. I watched the whole thing. But that was a bone of contention watching that. Um, but anyway, I started really getting into this stuff with a streaming service that you can just watch as much as you want. It's like Netflix. Now, granted, a lot of this stuff is junk, but I actually enjoy it. I actually realize it doesn't really matter. I love this stuff, particularly anything with that kind of isekai theme. I started watching the hell out of this stuff, and I started playing video games again with real vim and vigor. Baldur's Gate 3, I picked away at. My daughter really enjoyed that game, but I didn't have the luxury or really the desire to play it. In retrospect, I really wish I had played it more with her, because it could have been a good way to bond. But I played the hell out of that game, and relearned the new Dungeons and Dragons system, and I started role playing again. There's a shop here. This is another thing about North Carolina, man. The Renaissance Fair is insane here. It is a massive affair that goes on for months at a time, every weekend, different themes and stuff, and people just coming from all over dressing in anachronistic stuff. There are cons, multiple cons per year of of anime cons and superhero cons and all these other stuff. And there's multiple game stores here where you can just do a pickup game of Dungeons and Dragons. Never heard of such a thing. There's a professional dungeon master at this place I go to. Now, granted, it's he's not making a killing. The shop owner, though, has finally gotten to a point where there's enough players and stuff, and it's not just Dungeons and Dragons; it's board games and other stuff. But he's able to finally get his business to light up full time, and people are learning how to make money at this stuff. Crazy things. Where the world I come from is uh, is this stuff was so obscure. No one was There were no pickup games of Dungeons and Dragons, certainly not when I was 22, 21. you know and girls, there's so many women playing this game. Apparently Baldur's Gate has a more female player base, a larger female player base than a male player base. It's a Dungeons and Dragons game. It has this elaborate rule set, but it's also got a romance element. It's a dating sim with Dungeons and Dragons slipped in. But um and I realize it's there are a few people my age. I'm one of the oldest people that play regularly at this place I go to. It's called Luck Factory. This is not a plug. I'll plug it. You know what? I will plug it. I don't make a dollar at that place. I do get some store credit when I am a dungeon master there. But you know, I do it because Nick deserves it. He's making it work. You know, and it's tough to make money in hobbies like this. I was in karate for many years, and I loved karate too. I became a black belt, studied for 10 years, right along with my daughter. And the master of the school told me once, God, it's so hard to make money in martial arts. It's so hard because you have to have standards and hold people to account, um, and have them do this difficult thing. And they want the belts. Everybody wants the belts. And Taekwondo, for example, that is a money making machine. Don't. I mean, there are skilled practitioners of Taekwondo. Don't let me disparage that part. Okay, but we had one girl who came into our school. She was 17. She wasn't even 18 years old. Fourth degree black belt in Taekwondo. Fourth degree. My master of my school was 45 and had just earned his fourth degree, and that was a thing he had to go to Japan for, I believe, or either that or it was like the last one he could do before he had to go to Japan to get a higher rank. Okay, this is the scale that we were dealing with. But Taekwondo gives you these belts and charges you a mint, and that's how they make their money. And it's a whole association. It's a whole thing. Ours was a little different. Now, it's not to say they weren't trying to make some money. And the owner of the school he was good. He was good, but he came from the old days. Um, but anyway, the fact that they're making money and that there are girls playing this game, it's a younger generation for sure that plays this game. And what's happened is I come in there, and of course I'm like, back in my day, you had to save versus death or die. There were no death saving throws. You'd have to bring in two or three characters because you probably have one wiped. The games were different. They were a little harder, and the systems were awful, boy. Oh my God. Second edition Dungeons and Dragons was terrible. But all this to say that I'm digging back into my hobbies really heavily, and I've joined these meetup groups and stuff, an anime meetup group, all kids. Every now and again someone my age or older shows up, but they're all kids in their 20s and early 30s, and kids, but and I've been exposed to a whole different way of thinking in addition to this. you know um, my daughter kind of got the impression somehow, because I'm a little bit conservative in that, there are certain things that, like, maybe we shouldn't be teaching young children certain things and confusing them, or telling them that, you know, they're that there's something wrong with their body and they should do something medically to change it when they're 13. You know, I just don't think that's a great idea. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that sounds awful, but as a parent, these are, you understand the lizard brain too. You know, these kids are growing. I should not have made any life decisions like that when I was 13 or 14. I didn't know my ass from the hole in the ground. Okay. I was playing video games, you know, and living in a fantasy world is kind of how it is. So you know, but that said, she kind of got this impression that I was something of a bigot, you know, or whatever, like some right winger, whatever. And I realized at one point, my friend group, this was last year. I realized that I'm surrounded by this wide, very diverse, very gentle people, you know, all going through their thing or whatever. And I kind of, where I've fallen into this group is they like the dad energy. They do. They love the dad energy, you know. I had to figure it out. Somebody has actually had to point this out to me, that people seek me out. They just want to talk to me and be my friend and hear what's going on with me and tell them what's going on with them. You know, there's this girl that is at the um, Luck Factory who beeline to me one time, and she's like, I'm doing this kayak thing. You know, works at the nature center. I'm getting certified in this kayak thing. And I'm like, good job. Good. I know you'll get it. You know, when's your test and all that other stuff. And then later on, she comes up, I did it. I passed. I'm like, good job. Good job. I'm so proud of you, you know? And boy, I could see the light on her face, you know? It's some of these kids, man, that's all they need, man. I've learned that a lot in general, is that there's so much of that that just needs to go around. Just somebody just give you some positive encouragement, you know. But anyway, uh, in many ways, uh, the story of Uncle from Another World, he's knocked out in 1999, okay, and he is subsumed in this other world. There's this whole thing going on. He comes back up in 2017, and the world is so different. The world is so different, and he's trying to use his old frame of mind to impress upon the modern society. And it's only been 17 years. It hasn't been that long, but he finds he's very out of place. And it's interesting because at first they find him annoying, but they kind of learn to translate into his nephew and his, you know, paramour that likes him, but he's kind of clueless, the nephew. uh she they realize he's not a bad guy. He just he says awful things sometimes, but not from a place of meanness. It's just that's how the world was or whatever. And he wants everybody to get along and be happy. You know, things were a little different, and he's talking about stuff that they don't understand. You know, or talking in terms they don't understand. One of the running other themes is how we were bridging analog and digital. You know, VHS tapes plugging into camcorders, plugging into old TVs that had the weird prongs that plug into the back where the antenna would go, and you'd switch to channel 3 on the analog dial to have it pick up the signal, and like all this weird stuff that we had to figure out, all these wires and converters and voltage changers. I mean, if you got into this stuff, which I did, of course, um, I very much remember our first VCR. It was a four-head fancy VCR. My mom's husband and my stepfather would sometimes get high and watch QVC, the shopping network, and the blonde lady would come up and be like, look at this pan set or whatever, and yeah, I want item whatever, and he would do that from time to time. And he bought this four-head VCR. It was a very nice VCR, though. It was one of the first ones of its kind. It was heavy, very solid state. They didn't make them like that for very long because they were metal and stuff. He couldn't figure it out. He couldn't figure out how to make it work. Same with the Nintendo. When we bought it, I was like 9 years old. You bet your ass I'm gonna figure that one out, boy. And he watched me. He didn't want me to break it, you know, and he didn't want me to break the TV. But I parsed through that manual to figure out how to hook this thing up. I was 9, you know. And same with the VCR. The VCR came with a remote control that was very complex, and you could program it. You didn't have to just record You could actually tell it while you're watching one channel. You could record the stuff coming in on another channel. You could have subtitles. There's a, it's telling them there's this. It says that there's this SAP channel, and it would have other languages or subtitles for the people who can't hear. You can turn that on with this device and see the text on the bottom. Why would you want to do that? You're not deaf. I use subtitles all the time because and this one is I learned watching the movie Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I could not understand what was going on in that movie half the time. What they were saying, they're just mashing their words together. And with subtitles, it was a whole new movie, and I never went back. I always watched with subtitles. Um, but this Xennial generation, micro generation that we are, we figure this stuff out. We just bathe in it. How do I get this stuff working? My office is a nightmare of all this variety of stuff. Um, but he is from another world. That's what it feels like. And having been in this marriage, subsumed in it for so long, and now it's over, and I'm coming up and rediscovering who I am, and learning these hobbies, and you know what has changed, and adapting to it, and meeting these new people who think very differently. The world is very different, very, very different than it was in 1999. Not so much in some ways, and very different in others. And it's taken some getting used to. But I thought to myself at one point, for a bigot, I sure keep some strange company. And I have a lot of friends now, and they like me, even though I'm just this weird dude from an old world, a different world, and see things very differently. The isekai genre is almost always someone who's like a student, or an office worker, or someone who's unemployed. Someone, their life isn't terrible. Their life isn't terrible, but they are um, dissatisfied with it for some reason because it doesn't feel fulfilling. It's too challenging. The world is too complicated to figure out, you know, and there are not very many, but there are some of the female protagonists who feel the same way. Romance, especially in Japan, you have to understand there's a cultural element to a lot of these too. The salary man, that lives in an office, and basically lives in an office and has an apartment that he visits from time to time. Romance is not a thing. In Japan, there's a stigma against women who work and are married. You just, still to this day, you're not supposed to do that, and so they're discriminated against. So a lot of women, they just don't get married. They might fool around a little bit, but it's hard to meet people, and it's in a country of 400 million people that's the size of California. They're having a hard time connecting. you know it's not so different here, I suppose, but at least we have a little bit of geography to explain that. And we're separated by technology. That's something I've noticed with the younger generation, is everything goes through that screen, and they anything heartfelt they want to put on the screen first and deliver it that way so that they can protect themselves. And interaction socially is very difficult for a lot of them. um, and it only gets worse with the technology. And I remember watching a show that was talking about, you know the purpose of Facebook was to get in between you and your friends, you know and try to figure out how to market to you. And it's showing these pictures of people, all these kids in a cafeteria, all looking at their phone and not interacting at all. We didn't have that when I was growing up. It's just natural to walk up to somebody and be like, "Hey, what's going on? Looks like you're doing something fun. Can I check it out?" And they kind of freak out because it's not that the interaction is unwelcome necessarily, but it's so weird. Uh, okay, especially when you're an old man. No, I promise I'm not a creepy dude. I want to see what game you're playing. Tell me about the rules. You know, but these shows, these movies, and books are a power fantasy a lot of the times. Overlord, he's way more powerful than the world he comes, whereas the world he's in, like he comes from, he was ground down. He was just he was a worker, and basically, even though he worked his ass off, he was barely making it. He just had this really good video game console that he used to escape into, right? And but a lot of them are, oh, in this new world I am capable, and the community likes me, and there's these pretty girls that a lot of times it's a harem. There's not usually sex or anything like that. A lot of times the main character is clueless, just like Uncle from Another World. He has this girl that follows him around called Elf. He calls her Elf. She has a name. She gets mad at him about the fact that he doesn't call her by her name. um, and it's kind of a going joke because she follows a very common trope in anime called tsundere, which is the girl who's acting mean to you, but it's because she likes you. It's kind of the opposite of the boy that pulls the girl's hair, on the playground or whatever. It's not like I like you or anything. And but he doesn't recognize it. The nephew points out, because that trope became only common after he'd gotten into his coma. So he just thinks she's mean to him. She's always following me around, man. She's always there, and then she's insulting me. She's just, I mean, granted, she's pretty capable, and she's saved my bacon a couple of times. But then she gives me a hard time. Just says mean stuff. He just doesn't get it. And they're like, ah. So the nephew and his girl who likes him, that the uncle understands this dynamic, and he's like, go get her. They're doing the same thing, rooting for him about this adventures with Elf, who really likes him, but he's just missing all the clues. um, but these shows are a fantasy, a power fantasy, and in a lot of ways it's showing these fulfilling lives that they're salarymen, or whatever their deal is. They're unhappy in the normal world, and they end up in this new world, and they feel actualized because they understand the world. It's a video game world, so they can go up in levels, and they can cast magic. They have powers here. And oftentimes they can either figure out glitches, so to speak, in the world, or they just have a set of abilities that are above and beyond. So they're already super powerful, almost messianic characters in some circumstances. Um, and they're able to exert influence on the world in a way that they weren't able to do at home. And they feel satisfied and fulfilled. Some of these shows, one of them really spoke to me. It was called Handyman in Another World. And he was exactly that, just a day laborer that did odd jobs. And it's a kind of a social commentary on how we don't value the labor of people like that, who his job is, old lady, the door falls off the hinges, and he can fix it, and he oils it, makes it better than it was. And then she's grinding him down on price. Well, anybody can do that, you know unlocking doors, unlocking cars, and all this other stuff. But his labor is not appreciated at all in the normal world. And he gets into this other world. He doesn't get any special powers. He just has his own skill set. He's a locksmith, basically, and just a handyman. So, but in this video game type world, he gets picked up by these adventurers as their rogue, who can open the doors and open the chests. And their armor gets fixed. And he's like, oh, let me see that. Hold on a sec. Oh God. And hammers it out and smooths it out. Like, okay, try that out. And they're like, you're so helpful. You have no idea how much you're humble. He's humble. He's like, oh, thank you. But it's no big deal. It's just a little thing I can do. Um, and he doesn't feel particularly powerful in this world, and he's continually shocked by how much people appreciate his presence in their life. At the very end of the day, it's one of those, that old joke, this game, is disgusting. It appeals to the male fantasy, right? At the end of the show, spoiler alert, I guess, the community throws him a party for how much they appreciate everything he's done for them. That is the end of the show, and it's choking me up a little bit, because, man, I will tell you, we go on and appreciate it a lot, especially those of us that do a lot. We do a lot, some of us do, and it's taken for granted. And damn, isn't it nice to see just a bunch of people going, thank you. you know, and we even make fun of that thing that happened politically. Whereas if you even said thank you even once, you know, we don't, not asking for you to kowtow and worship, but just a little acknowledgement for everything I've done would be awesome. I'm still struggling with that. Still struggling with that. But um, and that's it. That's why this genre is so popular, is because people like me and my age, we feel emasculated, and almost in some ways we feel like the promise has been broken. A lot of these video games, a lot of these stories, I was growing up, they come from a normal world, and then some silver-haired, ponytailed princess comes along and whisks them off to adventure, or aliens land and this whole thing happens and you're off on an adventure. Some catalyst in these shows say that your normal life is over. Millennials understand this as your owl has arrived. They're referring to Hogwarts, when, oh God, I can leave this mundane world and go someplace special. It was 2007, and I was standing in the window of a building in Bellevue, Washington, looking out to the west, and the sun was setting. And as it was setting, the rays of the sun, they started turning Lake Washington yellow, this yellow color, and the whole sky was yellow. And it reminded me of a scene in Macross in Robotech. And in that scene, it was about halfway through the series. The premise there is that these aliens attack, and they have this ancient ship that they don't understand, that they've been trying to pick apart for years, and they'd fired it up, and that warned the aliens, that's where our ship is, right? That's what the conflict is. They want that ship back. And so these humans are suddenly assaulted by these aliens from the sky because they fired up this relic that had crash landed decade before. And they just start pressing all the buttons, basically, right? And one of the buttons is the warp drive. And the warp drive takes them out beyond Jupiter. They thought it would take them out by the moon. It takes them to a different moon, a different celestial body. And so they slowly, through episode after episode, have to slowly crawl their way back to Earth on conventional drives, because that warp drive disappears. They don't know what happens to it. It vaporizes. Quite an interesting science fiction tale for a cartoon when you think about this. And the only reason they don't get annihilated by these aliens on their way back is because they want that ship. They want to capture it. They do not want to destroy it. It has information and legends of their people and stuff on it. And they are, it's a show about conflicting cultures that come together, and they're slowly starting to understand about each other. And the aliens are trying to kind of like plant spies and stuff like that on the ship to try to get it, try to take it over. But they get back to Earth, and the aliens know that if they get back into the range of Earth's defense systems, now they're gonna have a real hard time getting back to get that ship. So they do this final push, and it's this whole thing. People die and everything. It's an epic scene in this show. And this ship, of course, it transforms into a robot. And they finally get into range of Earth's defenses, and then they're getting their, this ship is getting beat up and stuff, but like Earth has finally been able to come and help them, because everything's conventional. They don't have the stuff that the aliens do, but they can finally defend their people as they're coming back on this ship. And this ship's all tattered and busted, and it lands in the lake, and they survive it. And the scene is this yellow lake as the sun is setting, and it shows the sun setting behind the ship. Powerful, powerful imagery when you're so invested in this story. And I was looking out at the Lake Washington, and I was reminded of that scene, and I realized I'm as old now as the mentor was, who dies in that show. There will be no threshold over which I'm thrown. It crashed in on me like a wave. This is my life here. I am here in an office, working on computers. It's not a bad job. and I've got a family. It's a nice family. But that call to adventure that these shows kind of represented was never going to come for me. That was a hard realization. That was about the time that these stories started getting written by people like me, who, it's not that the world is so bad for us. And I know the world is wonderful and life is good and all that other stuff. Now, it's not so great for some people, of course, and we should all count our blessings and all those other things. And in one of these shows, the girl, they come back to Earth and she asks him, "What? From a world this prosperous, how could someone from a world like this have want anything to do with a world like ours?" And he ponders that and he says, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know why I feel so fulfilled in your primitive world where I feel powerful. But we're emasculated, to put it bluntly. And these shows are a fantasy of escaping from the banality of the ordinary world, not the horrors of the ordinary world, but the banality, and finally feeling a sense of adventure and something that's not just about grinding out money and paying mortgages and paying bills and maybe taking care of other people, or whatever our particular scene in life is, but we are spinning our wheels, just spinning our wheels, and getting older and older, and realizing this is something is missing here. And these shows kind of speak to that. And the stories that we were told by way of video games and anime and other mediums told these epic tales and gave us musical soundtracks and such with that. And in Uncle from Another World, there's a scene where one of these girls, they know he's lonely. They know he puts on a good face, and he helps people and all this other stuff in that other world. But they know he's lonely. There's something not fulfilled with him. And at one point, one of the girls says, "Teach me a song of your homeworld." So he does. And it's a comical scene, because, okay, I got it. And she starts singing the song from the Starlight Zone, the music from the Starlight Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog. And of course, his nephew and his friend are watching this, just they're so horrified when they finally find out what it is that he told them, what she sings. That's what you gave her. But when she started singing in that scene, I knew exactly what it was. And it brought a little joy to my heart to hear her sing it. It's so nuanced, because I know it's so ridiculous, and I know exactly where the cousin or the nephew is coming from. I know exactly what it's funny, it is, and yet it is a song of my people. The music in these games, boy, it was so good, and you were on an adventure, and you were making friends, and you were overcoming struggles and growing in power in a system, in a world that you understood. You were so immersed in these worlds, you were staring at that black box for hours at a time, because it was a world you could control and feel powerful in. And for me, that hasn't changed. And I think that's obviously, with how popular this genre is, it speaks to a lot of people who, it's hard to say what we want. What could someone from a world this prosperous want in a world like ours, like the girl says? I don't know. I don't know. But something's not right here. Is the underlying theme. Something's not right here. My talents are going to waste in this place and I'm withering away. Is the feeling that many of us have. And I don't know what that means, and I don't know how to solve it because there is no ponytailed, silver-haired princess coming to throw us over the threshold. Um, and time creeps ever on, and the world gets a little harder, and things get a little shittier. So my desire, all of our desire, who apparently like these shows, to escape it gets higher and higher, even though, notwithstanding my own personal situation, I've got nothing to complain about. But one way my life has gotten better, one way the power has increased in my life, is the new relationships I've made and the friendships that I have now, and storytelling as I do, playing Dungeons and Dragons, and participating in philosophy group, and being somebody important, just a little important to many people's lives. That that is what's keeping me going, because it ain't the money. It ain't the grind of paying taxes and rent and power bills and trying to juggle eating good versus eating stuff that I actually enjoy, and working out versus being lazy and all that other stuff. But I know if I had a chance to escape it in the way that these stories are giving their characters an option to do, I absolutely would, even if it meant going through a struggle. If it was meaningful and I felt like I understood it and that I could have a powerful influence on my environment, no matter how strange or fantastical it was, compared to this, you betcha. So take me away, Truck-kun. I'm ready.